Hello, and welcome to another episode of your Bish Therapist podcast. I'm your host, Melissa Reich, a licensed therapist who is serving clinical interpretations on all things pop culture. Today's episode is going to be a big one. Today, I'm going to cover the feud between Jeff Lewis, Heather McDonald, Justin Martindale, and a few other players that are involved. I'm going to start by discussing the individuals involved. I really, as you all know and appreciate about me by now, I really like to do my research. I have pages and pages of notes. So what I'm going to start to do is discuss the individuals involved, who they are. I'm going to provide a detailed timeline of the events that are being discussed. And of course, I'm going to share my clinical interpretations of it all with you. So I'm just going to jump right into it because this is probably going to be a long one. So bear with me. Also, what I ask is people to bear with me in terms of this is a lot of moving parts. It's a lot of information. And I tend to be a little perfectionistic, but I did the best that I could to kind of put all the moving parts together. Because really what we're talking about here is we're talking about like 4 or 5 different podcasts, Patreons, things that have been said on podcasts, on social media. It's really been challenging to follow, but I've done the work, so you don't have to. And I appreciate people who have already said that they appreciate me for that. So, okay, so first I'm going to start off by sharing who the players are in this drama before getting to what it's about. So the main 2 people involved here are Jeff Lewis and Heather McDonald. I know many of you listening know who they are, but for those who don't, I'm going to just share real quick. So Jeff Lewis is a real estate developer. He started off doing that, and then that led him into his show, which was called Flipping Out, where he flipped real estate properties, but the title was actually more meaningful in terms of his emotional flipping out when he got angry or frustrated or what have you. So that ran for, I want to say 8 seasons. And Jeff is also a very gifted interior designer. I will say I've seen his work. It's amazing. And his new show is called Hollywood House Lift, which is very good. I mean, I highly recommend watching it. It's entertaining. He has great celebrity guests that he redoes their homes and things like that. And currently he's the host of Jeff Lewis Live channel on Sirius XM. So he has a show on Sirius. He has his own channel, and he has an after show and all of these things. Heather McDonald is a stand-up comedian, host of Juicy Scoop podcast. I am a Juicy Scooper. I haven't been since the beginning, but I have for, the last few years. She also is an actress and an author. I think she wrote 2 books. She's known for her appearances on Chelsea Lately, and what she's best known for is her falling out with Chelsea Handler and subsequent kind of telling the story about how she was wronged by Chelsea and things like that. So that's important to keep in mind because this is just kind of like a broken record that seems to be continually playing for her. The other people involved, so the 2 main other people I'm going to talk about here is Megan Weaver and Justin Martindale. So Justin Martindale is a stand-up comedian, actor, writer, and performer. He is the host of Just Saying podcast with Justin Martindale on Apple. And he's very funny. He was this is hotly debated. He wasn't a co-host per se on Juicy Scoop, but he was a frequent guest. The semantics around the role that he's played has kind of come into play at this point, but the facts are that he was featured on Juicy Scoop 33 times. That I know for sure. So whatever you want to call that, he was a co-host Juicy Scoop 33 times, in addition to his own podcasts and stand-up and things like that. He's very funny. I like him very much as well. Megan Weaver, she is an interior designer, and she is a radio co-host on Jeff Lewis Live. two other kind of peripheral people involved that I'm just going to share about who they are, so people don't get confused, and then I can come back to it, is Julie Goldman and Brandy Howard. They were the host of People's Couch. Julie does stand-up. They both recently had an after show on Jeff Lewis Live, which they got fired from a couple weeks ago. So I'm going to be maybe mentioning them a little bit because Heather is kind of championing for them, because Brandy and Julie have also been on Heather's show. This is kind of a very, for lack of a better term, incestuous universe of people. They all kind of run in the same crowd. They run with the same people. And so there is a lot of overlap here. And the last person whose name is going to come up is Krista Lamas. Krista is a producer, entrepreneur, and she's very good friends with Jeff Lewis. But she's also, was also friends with Heather McDonald and Justin Martindale and Megan. And so all the people involved, Krista has kind of been on the periphery. What Krista, she had some significant trauma. She was married to a man named Michael Lamas, who he owned a hemp company, I think it was a marijuana company, and he died tragically in a car accident in 2017. However, it is important to note that Michael died weeks before he was to be sentenced for a Ponzi scheme that he participated in to the tune of, I guess, maybe $100 million. So these are all the actors. And to be clear, again, I listen to Jeff Lewis every day. I've listened to him since the beginning. I've watched Flipping Out. I watch Hollywood House Lift. I'm a Juicy Scooper. I've listened to Heather for years. And, Justin, I've listened to him too. Julie and Brandy have an amazing show on Patreon. I highly recommend that you go check that out, because now they're no longer on Jeff Lewis Live, but they're still very amazingly funny and wonderful, and I just adore them both. So I feel like I kind of have a good understanding of all these people. I have listened to all the cross-pollination of, Jeff's podcast and Heather's podcast. And Heather, there's a certain tier that you have to belong to get the quote unquote extra juicy. So I subscribe to that as well. So I've listened to her regular Juicy Scoop. I've listened to her extra juicy. I've listened to Julie and Brandy. I've listened to Justin. So I've truly listened and consumed as much information about this as I possibly could. I'm not going to lie. My brain feels a little overwhelmed, but I really believe in being prepared for podcasts. So now what I'm going to give you is a timeline of events, because it is very confusing. But as I was listening to it, I just kind of jotted down, I'll give you a brief timeline. So background, Heather and Jeff have been friends since college. So I want to say about 25 years, I think, maybe a little bit longer, but they met in college and they kind of hit it off immediately. Heather and Jeff have a lot of similarities, which I'm going to talk about and address in a little bit. I think that they're more alike than either of them want to believe. But they certainly have a lot of commonalities. And so they've been friends for a long time. So the timeline starts in 2022. I'm not sure the month. I want to say it was fall. But Jeff and Heather both acknowledged that Heather had Justin Martindale on her Juicy Scoop, as I mentioned, 33 times, whether he was a co-host or a guest, whatever you want to call him. He was a part of Juicy Scoop. So Heather called Jeff and asked him not to have Justin Martindale on Jeff's show, because he is, quote, a regular Juicy Scoop host, end quote. Heather has since acknowledged that this phone call did happen, and she justified her beliefs that having Justin on Jeff's show would be problematic, and she didn't want streams to be crossed, I guess, for lack of a better term. So So she did acknowledge that that phone call happened, and she admitted that she did not want Justin on Jeff's show, which personally I think is strange, and I'm gonna discuss that a little later as well. Then in March 2023, here's where Megan Weaver becomes involved. Megan and Heather were at a party. I think Rick and Kelly Leventhal were having a party, and they're all friendly. And I guess Megan confronted Heather, and she said some very unkind things to the effect of, nobody likes you, things like that. Due to this led to a lot of drama where Heather put out a couple of responses to this incident behind a paywall, which is Patreon. So for people who don't know, Patreon is a paywall that people use where people, can share their podcast content, but people have to pay for it. Okay. So Heather was upset about what Megan did, and Megan didn't apologize quickly enough. So Heather put out these emergency Patreon podcasts, which it's not cool what happened, but to put out an emergency Patreon about it is, it's very self-serving, right? I mean, it was an emergency to Heather. It wasn't an emergency to anybody else, but I understand it. Her feelings were hurt. She was, taken aback. So she put out these emergency Patreons, again, behind the paywall. So you have to pay at least $5 to get to that tier. And then I think there's another tier above it that there's a higher amount that you can pay. And in the highest tier, Heather will talk about her personal issues, her family stuff, things like that. I don't subscribe to that tier. So in fairness, I don't know Heather's origin story. I kind of go back and forth about, people should be paid for their time and their content. I think that's really important. And, but I also can see where it's being perceived as opportunistic and manipulative. So I do see two sides to that. So after the fight in March 2023, Heather vowed never to go on Jeff Lewis again. Now, at the time, the thing that's great about Jeff is he will acknowledge and call people on stuff when they're wrong, even his friends and even himself. So he did acknowledge that what Megan did wasn't okay. They talked about it on his podcast, Heather talked about it on her podcast. Megan Weaver since apologized. And in fact, on Jeff Lewis's show last week, he claims that Megan tried to text Heather, a real sincere apology, after all this happened, just saying, listen, I'd love to get together, have lunch. Let's put this to bed. And Heather simply responded, N-O. And then a week later, when the shit hit the fan, she apparently did text Megan again, I've had a change of heart, et cetera, et cetera. So again, that feels a bit self-serving, but, listen, we all need support. So, I understand, what Heather was trying to do there. Now, on August 7th, 2023, there was a new conversation between Heather and Jeff about Justin being on the show. Heather claims that she verbally gave the okay for Justin to be on Jeff Lewis Live because his role at Juicy Scoop had changed. So she claims that she was actually then okay with it in August, and Jeff said, no, I'm not interested in having him on. He's drama. Okay. Then August 30th, 2023, Justin dropped his podcast where he shared his side of the story, which I will get to that in just a minute. And then September 6th, 2023, just yesterday, Jeff announced that Justin will be coming on his show and encouraged other disgruntled Juicy Scoop hosts to come on his show as well. Oh my gosh, this is so much information. So that is the general timeline of events. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to share Justin's side of it, but I'm also going to share a piece of information that I have not heard one other podcaster talk about or bring up. So that's going to be really cool. So first, what I'm going to do is Justin Martindale on his Just Saying podcast. The most important things that he said essentially was that he and Heather had been friends for years and years and years. And he is a gay man. So as part of the LGBTQIA plus community, he was participating in a fundraiser called Drag Isn't Dangerous. And, as an ally and an advocate, Heather always said that she was an ally and an advocate. So Justin asked her as an ally and an advocate and as his friend to promote the Drag Isn't Dangerous, right? And apparently Heather said no because she didn't want to alienate her fans. So to me, that's just, here's the thing. Personally, I don't care for that. Did she have every right to say no to that? Sure. For me, being an ally and an advocate is a full-time position. That's it. I could understand why Justin was very hurt about that because, if I were gay and my best friend, who's an ally and an advocate, refused to share about my event or promote it, which, by the way, is for such a good cause because drag isn't dangerous. Drag is amazing. Drag shows are great. Drag queens are life. And, I understand when you have a platform, there are certain tenuous circumstances or topics that you may feel scared to cover because you don't want to alienate your audience, which I can also understand that. But for me, I understand where Justin came from in terms of, this person, she's my friend, she's an ally, and she's not going to promote this. I understand how his feelings were hurt, and my feelings would have been hurt too. Personally, I would not have done that. I would have absolutely promoted. I would have been happy to do that, but that is me. That's just me. So Justin kind of gave a little bit of a timeline in terms of the deterioration of their relationship. And he said that from May to July of 2023, things were kind of weird after that. He also said that there was some sort of pool party on June 3rd of 2023 where Heather got mad that she wasn't invited and then did something kind of strange where she sent Justin a screenshot of talking to a fan about how she was upset that she wasn't invited. It just was very confusing and didn't make a lot of sense to me. So then Justin, on July 11th, he did his last episode of Juicy Scoop. And this is where, for me, things get really, really serious. I'm also going to issue a trigger warning because I'm going to be discussing the Sounds of Freedom because that's what the rift, really how this happened. And The Sounds of Freedom is a documentary about sex trafficking. And, it's a very, very important topic to not only discuss. I'm not going to get into that. So don't, you don't have to tune out. I'm just mentioning it. And, along with that comes talking about, sex trafficking. Okay. So his last episode, he made a joke. So Heather apparently brought up the Sounds of Freedom documentary, and Justin was not prepared for that. He didn't know that she was going to talk about that. So he kind of admittedly flippantly made a joke about it, and people started commenting that he should end his life. They were using gay slurs. I'm going to give another PSA real quick. If somebody does something online that you don't like, you don't get to threaten their life or use gay slurs ever. That's not acceptable. It is possible to be mad at people without completely eviscerating them, being racist, sexist, homophobic, whatever it is. Can we just stop doing that, please? It's so insane to me how people get so passionate about these issues. And it's like, I'm a passionate person too, but if you're so passionate that you want to tell someone that they should end their life because of a joke they made, I think you really need to examine that. I think that's more of an us problem and not so much of a them problem, if you know what I mean. So the real issue here was that Heather told him to ignore it and liked comments that were negative about him. He asked her to condemn the hate and she did not. Whether it was that she refused or she just didn't, I don't know, but she certainly did not, stand up for him and say, people were calling him a groomer and all these things. And in the gay community, there is this horrific trend of accusing gay men of being groomers. And I'm just like, oh God, it's just so homophobic. Can we not do that? It's just so awful. So, Justin felt very unsupported and he thought, I am getting all these hate messages. I can't continue to be on Juicy Scoop. So Heather was like, okay, fine, take a break. And then, things kind of deteriorated from there. The last thing that Justin claimed is just that there was an incident where it was his birthday and it was after Megan Weaver and she had the fight. And she called Justin on his birthday crying about this, venting, which again, I get that. She was very upset. But apparently it was Justin's birthday and Heather just completely missed that and just talked about herself. And, and again, Justin is a good friend. He was there for Heather when she had that fall at the comedy club. He was very helpful to her then. He was very supportive of her when she called on his birthday and she didn't even wish him happy birthday, things like that, which, when we get upset, as humans, we can, have our head up our butts, like for sure, I know I'm guilty of that too. That's just a human experience. But what I'm hearing and what I'm noticing is that when it comes to her attention, the things that she's done, she doesn't acknowledge, yes, I did that and I'm so sorry. She kind of doubles down and says, well, she makes some excuses for herself or, claims to be the victim. That for sure I have absolutely noticed. Now, before I share my interpretations and some red flags and, things like that, I'm going to discuss something that I have not heard one other podcaster talk about, which is in 2020 on YouTube, there is 2 clips of, it's called The Burt Show. The Burt Show on YouTube with Davy Crimmins. Oh, I'm sorry. Now I'm forgetting how to say it properly. Forgive me. But it's Davi Crimmins. Davy, I believe. She is a comedian. She's a stand-up. And she's also a radio host on The Burt Show. And part 1 of the video is her talking about opening for Heather being the worst experience of her life. I'm not going to go into the whole thing because I will encourage you to go watch it for yourselves because, don't just listen to what I'm saying. You should, do your own listening and, form your own opinions from there. But essentially, Davi says that Heather just was a nightmare. She was unkind. She yelled at her about, there was some sort of miscommunication about, Davi, I guess, is not a clean comic. And by the way, I'm a stand-up comedian junkie. So for me, this is just another interesting intersection of all this drama. I adore stand-up comedy. I go every chance that I get whenever, people come here. So I just respect the craft a lot. And, I adore it. So I guess Heather wanted her to do a clean set, but somehow it was lost in translation. And, Davi said that she had all these receipts about, she had asked the comedy club and Heather's people, does it need to be clean? Because, these comedians, they can't just change their act on, boom, like that. They can't just do that. Plus, as a performer or a podcaster, there's a certain amount of being prepared that you have to have. So imagine being told 10 minutes before you're supposed to go on, you have to change your whole act. So, Davi was just completely blindsided and just said that Heather was rude and unkind and what have you. So they talk about this on the Burt Show. And then there's a second part where Heather calls in to defend herself. Holy moly. Honestly, of all the things that have happened to me, this really is kind of the ickiest, and it really shows Heather's struggle to take accountability in real time. So I'm going to share with you a synopsis of that second part. And again, I encourage you all to go to YouTube and check that out. I'll even post links to it on my Instagram page when this episode airs. So Heather calls in to defend herself, and essentially she just wouldn't let anybody talk. She kind of went on this 10-minute soliloquy of, this is what happened, and it was a miscommunication. It wasn't my fault. It was everybody else's fault. It was, and she just went on and on and on and on. And the radio host jumped in and said, hold on a second. You're just taking all of this time and not letting anybody else talk. And she continued to kind of like fight back and still, talk about her perspective and things like that. So for me, that was a red flag because it wasn't appropriate. When we have issues with people, the conversation has to be a two-way thing. And from my observation, my therapist brain, watching this and listening to it, I can promise you that Heather was extremely defensive. She was unkind. She, which again, I get it. If you're being accused of something you feel like you didn't do, I understand. But the way that she came off in this clip was just really not great. She appeared rude and entitled, unkind, and really failed to have a conversation. The other thing that she did, which I found interesting, was she really didn't issue an apology. She did this thing where, and this is what drives me crazy about getting into the nitty-gritty details of things, is that it's a tactic that's often used to try to confuse people so that you can manipulate. And what I notice is that Heather just, you could tell she was like flipping through papers as she was on the podcast, and she was just fervently trying to say, nope, it wasn't my fault. It was someone else's fault. It was someone else's fault. I have receipts to prove it was someone else's fault. And it's like, if somebody says you were rude and you hurt their feelings, the only acceptable response is, I'm sorry. Tell me that was not my intention, but clearly I did hurt your feelings. So tell me what I need to do to be a better XYZ, right? That's a healthy response. Is it hard to listen to people giving you constructive criticism? Sure. But to be good people, to be, fully functioning, healthy adults, we have to have people in our lives who can say to us, hey, that wasn't cool, or I'm concerned about this. That's part of, to me, what it is to be a friend, a spouse, a partner, what have you. I have my husband and my best friends. We have a relationship where we call each other out on our stuff lovingly and kindly and with support and love, right? So when someone is calling you out on something and it's not loving and it's not kind and it's not coming from a place of love, they just don't like you, it is harder to be calm, cool, and collected. However, Heather's reaction to me was very, very telling, and it wasn't good. So again, she used that tactic to confuse and, try to usurp her own responsibility, which I just found really strange and really concerning. Okay. So now I'm going to move on to some important factors um, and red flags with Jeff and with Heather. And, I kind of want to really give a balanced opinion from my clinical perspective of some things that they do well, some things that they don't, and maybe could work on. So I'll start with Heather. My therapist brain works in really interesting ways. And through all of this research I've been doing, there was one little thing that Heather said that probably nobody else even really thought about after she said it. But for me, it's, there are these things where I hear them and it's just, I can't, it knocks something loose in my brain, and I just know who people are, so it's kind of, it's a blessing, it's a gift and a curse. But so Heather, when she went on Jeff Lewis's podcast just a couple days ago to, it was supposed to be her triumphant return to the podcast, and what it ended up being is Jeff acknowledging that Megan did something wrong and wanting Heather to acknowledge her wrongs as well. But Heather was completely unable to do that. In her opinion, she was a victim. She continues to be a victim, and she plays no role in any of this. And what I will say is that when there's a dynamic of two people or more, we always play a role. Always. Unless we're talking about someone who has significant or severe psychopathology, narcissism, sociopathy, things like that, then that's a different situation. But when we're just talking about folks who, will fall on a spectrum of maybe some characteristics, we always play a role, is my point. And to be healthy, productive adults, what we have to do is be willing to own our role. And it's not always equal. It's not always 50-50, like Heather and Jeff 50-50, but they each played a role in the disintegration, essentially, of their relationship. And to me, it started with, Jeff was really trying to get her to take accountability for, that she profited off this drama. And Heather claimed that she didn't know how much that she made, but, that can't be true. I mean, as a person who is in charge of my own podcast and my own social media and things like that, you better believe I know what my numbers are and, my insights and all of that. I mean, I don't make any money because I'm just a baby podcast. I hope to one day. But, for Heather to not even be able to acknowledge that perhaps she profited off of this, which she definitely did, and, that she played a role. Heather noted that these things, and this is out of Heather's mouth, these things have continued to happen to her throughout her life. And so she looks at the situations and she says, okay, what do I need to do different? Which is admirable, which is great, right? But she misses the mark, in my opinion, because she is unable to have that self-awareness and humility to say, yeah, you know what? I was wrong. I made a misstep. She gives me the vibes of someone who, saying that we're wrong doesn't mean that it's okay that somebody hurt us, right? So these are two different issues that I think sometimes people conflate together, that if you admit that you're wrong, somehow it usurps your point or, what have you. But to me, admitting that you're wrong and acknowledging your role in something is necessary for personal growth. So if people who are listening to this, if there are situations that keep coming around in your life, I do believe that the universe, and this is how I conceptualize it, the universe, God, whoever you believe in, is trying to share with you or give you some direction in terms of for you, for your own betterment, some things that maybe you could do a little bit different, right? It's an opportunity for growth, which is what I'm getting to. Admitting that you're wrong, seeing our own missteps, character defects, things like that, that is an opportunity for growth. And some people just aren't capable of that. And it certainly seems, the thing that Heather has done that also has been a red flag to me is she blames, she says that people are jealous of her. And whenever I hear someone continually say, I continue to have these issues, but I think it's just that people are jealous of me. Yikes. That is a wild red flag. Can that be the case sometimes? Sure. But it's just a really, to me, irritating way to usurp responsibility, to say, I don't have personal responsibility in this because these people are jealous of me. And it's like, I don't think that's true. Now, the last thing I'm going to say about Heather that to me was a red flag, this really upset me and bothered me. And going back to, this was the one comment that really made me think differently about Heather, which is insane because you would think all of this stuff I just said made me think differently, but really it was this one comment. So she went on Jeff Lewis, and she said, and I'm quoting it here and I'm going to say it once because it's racist and it's unkind, but I'm going to give the quote and, then I'm just going to refer to the quote. She said, she said, my father, who's now dead. So if you don't like this, go after him. Which before she even said what it was, I was like, ooh, yikes, that's kind of weird. She said 10 billion Chinese don't give a fuck. And what she was referring to is that apparently it was an old folksy saying that her dad used to say, which I think a lot of us have grown up with racist relatives and we don't have to repeat or spew the racist nonsense that they say. I think when she said that, and afterwards, people kind of cringed and laughed and things like that because it was such a racist thing to say. And it also was just a stupid thing to say. What she was trying to say is that, I'm going to say this in my terms, we're just a speck in the universe. We're just small in this tiny little world. And ultimately, we may think that at the end of the day, things are the end of our world, but no one really cares, So that's kind of what she was trying to say. I think the way she said it, as I'll repeat, was racist and just dumb and inarticulate. But here's what really got me changing my mind about Heather is she just doubled down about it being funny, which it's not, because I'm a huge stand-up junkie. And, to me, the hacky, low-hanging fruit of this is just I don't know. I also don't find racism funny. So perhaps I'm the wrong audience. So she essentially doubled down on it and said that, well, my dead father said it. So if you have an issue, come after him. So I'm going to share, that is called emotional manipulation. Okay. And I don't like it. There are things for me as a therapist that may seem small to the average person, but to me are huge, huge, huge. And that's one of them. That is emotional manipulation, where it's you're going to repeat something horrible that doesn't even make sense. And you're going to blame it on your deceased father. It's so strange. And it really, for me, shows the lack of accountability and the lack of awareness in terms of her potential role in her own issues. I'm going to be even clear right now. Heather is Heather's own problem. And I like Heather. I think that, she's funny. I think that, she can do good interviews. But I'm certainly never going to deny the fact that what she's doing is not healthy or acceptable. Now on to Jeff. So Oh, wait, one other thing that Heather did, which I found so contradictory, is, Heather was upset after the whole, Jeff Lewis, he blocked her and unfriended her. He went on his radio show to say that they're not friends anymore, and she was very upset about it. And she was kind of had this rant about, claiming her podcast was number one in the interviews this week. But like, she just made fun of Bethany for doing the same thing. I mean, literally not more than 2 weeks ago. So I think you got to be careful. You better make sure you don't live in a glass house before you throw stones. So that's what I'm going to say about that. With Jeff, so I've been a listener of Jeff Lewis Live since day one. I mentioned I've watched Flipping Out. I've watched all his shows. Heather and Jeff, as I mentioned, have a lot of similarities. And I'm going to share what those are in just a minute. But what Jeff has done, Jeff has made his living projecting his unresolved issues and feelings onto other people and flipping out on them. So that's how he has made his living. And, Jeff tends to engage in the same behaviors that he finds unacceptable. But when he does it, it's different than when other people do it. So there is some contradictory stuff there that I'm not a huge fan of. Jeff tends to go scorched earth when he's angry and then apologizes later. So it's an inappropriate pattern of behavior, in my estimation, that has had significant negative consequences for Jeff. He's lost, business deals, relationships. However, here's the thing that Jeff does that Heather's not able to. Jeff is really great about saying, you know what? I screwed up. I was wrong. I'm sorry. He is good at hearing people when they're angry and, saying, okay, yep, I did that. So for me, that's a piece to Jeff that I can appreciate and I think is what continues to draw people in about him. There's something very beautiful about being a person and able to own your stuff all the time, which he seems to do. The thing, though, that Jeff did that was really frustrating, and he'll admit this, is that when Heather and Jeff are hurt, they just are sent reeling, and they have this very emotionally reactive outburst. And Jeff got himself involved with, and this is where Krista Lamas comes into the conversation. So Krista lent Heather some very expensive diamond earrings, and Heather lost them and just ignored it or never said anything. Krista asked her about the earrings, and I guess she just never responded. And so what Jeff did, which he later admitted he shouldn't have done, but it's like, for me, it's like if you continue to do the same thing over and over, but then just apologize for it, it's like, well, the apology gets old after a while. It's not meaningful because if you're just going to do the same thing, that's where Jeff frustrates me because I think he can be a great person. And I think that, he just gets lost in the sauce of his own emotions sometimes, as does Heather. So the one thing he did that really irritated with me was he brought up this issue between Heather and Krista about, he claimed that Heather lost these earrings and they were $10,000 and that it was a felony and that Krista should sue. And then the next day on the radio, he admitted that he probably shouldn't have said that. And, he's human and that there are days that he should take a day off, but he can't because of his contractual obligations. But also to me, that usurps personal responsibility, right? Which is like, there are ways to be upset without verbally eviscerating someone or going scorched earth. And as adults, I think that it is my responsibility and mine alone to deal with my stuff and my feelings so that I don't bleed on people who didn't cut me, so to speak, right? There's this thought about trauma in that, when you have trauma and it's unresolved, you end up bleeding on people who weren't the ones to cut you. And that's kind of what Heather and Jeff both do. Healing isn't linear, meaning it's hard. It's all over the map. It's not something like once you're healed, but it seems like there's definitely some gaps in personal development, in my opinion, for Jeff and for Heather. So he went back on the radio and he said that, well, the earrings were actually $2,400 or $3,000. And he read the email that he encouraged Krista to sue Heather. So, okay, I don't want to get too much into the details of this anymore because that's boring to me. But the point is that, a caller called in to the Jeff Lewis Live after show yesterday, which, yes, I literally even listened to that too. And she was like so angry at Jeff, and she just like gave it to him, and she was yelling at him, and she was like, you didn't own your stuff and blah, blah, blah. And Jeff was like, you're right. I didn't. I'm going to own it now. And this woman, was angry and yelling at him. So this goes back to my, we should not be so invested in these people who aren't a part of our lives. These are people who are entertainers. We listen to them. We may feel they're friends, but if we're getting that angry about a celebrity kind of actions, I think that's really important to look for you. What's going on? Is that triggering something for you? That happens to me all the time. I'm a human and I get triggered by things, and there are certain things that irritate me more than others. So there's a piece of humanity to that, but I just thought that was very interesting. So here's my overall impressions. Jeff and Heather, as I mentioned, are very similar. I think that, again, as a therapist, I have to be very mindful of what I say. I am not diagnosing anybody. As I've talked in my podcast before, there is a continuum of traits. So I'm going to use narcissism as an example. There's a continuum of the trait of narcissism. We all have bits and pieces of it, even myself included. Okay. So I think Heather and Jeff definitely fall somewhere on that spectrum. Some days more than others. And with that comes a desire for power and control. I see that with both of them, right? They have a desire for power and control over people that work for them. Justin Martindale, she doesn't own him. He can, do what he wants to do. And quite frankly, if someone's my friend and they're on my show, I want them to be prosperous and successful. Go for it, mazel. But I think that they both have some power and control issues about their guests and their show and things like that. I think sometimes they both take a victim stance. I think Heather a little bit more than Jeff. Like I said, just because Jeff will apologize. And the thing that's hardest for me is to see them both be so emotionally reactive. They struggle to self-regulate. So one of the last things that I'm going to talk about, because this is turning into a very long podcast, is there is something called dialectical behavior therapy, DBT for short. I am an expert in DBT. I have been certified and trained. I've used it in my private practice. So there are 4 DBT skills that I'm going to share, which are emotion regulation, distress tolerance, mindfulness, and interpersonal effectiveness skills. Essentially, this is a format that helps people learn how to refrain from being emotionally reactive, how to communicate more effectively and in better ways, and how to be mindful of your role in relationships. So my recommendation would be anyone listening to this that is struggling with something similar, you're human. Don't beat yourself up. I'm not here to beat anybody up. Heather's a person, Jeff's a person. All these people are humans, therefore imperfect. I'm not here to beat anybody up. What it's important to do, though, is when you know better, you got to do better. And DBT skills are one of those, they're good skills for life. And, I know that Jeff is in his own therapy. He talks about that on the show. Heather's treatment plan is none of my business. I've mentioned that before. For me, as adults who are taking all this drama and information in, I always try to make something good out of this dumpster fire we call reality TV and all this. So what I'd like everyone listening to do is just take a minute to self-assess. And if there are some things that you want to change, don't beat yourself up. Great. Work on it. Psychologytoday.com. You can go to psychologytoday.com, and this is not a sponsored post because no one even knows who I am. But you can go there. You can look up clinicians. You can look up, do they do DBT, or are you more interested in psychoanalytic, things like that. You can go and just peruse, and you can find people in your area who take your insurance. It's a beautiful thing. There's also things like BetterHelp, and there's a lot of ways to get yourself some help. And if none of that works for you, oh, pardon the thunder, it's like a storm's a brewing here in Northeast PA. Yikes. But just Google it too. Google DBT skills. I mean, I am a believer in self-education. Not everybody has the funds and the resources to be able to attend therapy or to be able to attend, different courses and things like that. So I am, an advocate for myself and for you guys to self-educate, look up DBT skills, kind of do a little bit of your own research on that. I'm happy to do another episode on it if people are interested in that, to explain a little bit more about how that can be helpful. So I think for me, the take-home message here is that relationships are hard, and owning your stuff is really important for nobody else other than your own personal growth. Being able to be accountable and to say, hey, I did this, I did that, there's a real significant beauty in that for me. And, that's just my 2 cents. So I sincerely appreciate everybody listening to this extra long podcast. It was so much information. I appreciate you all hanging in there with me. I also want to take a minute to thank everybody for all the support and love so far, on my YouTube page. So I just want to take a minute to say, if you're listening to this podcast, there is a full video that accompanies it, with my insane face gestures and my hand gestures and all that stuff. You can see that on YouTube, Your Bish Therapist channel. I am also on Instagram, Your Bish Therapist. And I would just ask, if you love this podcast, please subscribe. Please subscribe to YouTube. Please head over to my Instagram. I post a lot of things there as well. So thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this today. I hope what I've shared was helpful, and I'm happy to do, another episode on this if people so desire. So speaking of that, I want your feedback. I want to know what you all want to hear about. Go over to Instagram and let me know. Let me know, what do you want to hear me talk about next? So far, it's mostly been the Bravoverse, but I'm very interested in, as I mentioned, the Murdaugh murders and other things. There's just so much content and so little time. So I want to try to give you all what you want. So please, please, please let me know. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do that legal stuff where I read my disclaimer. And here it goes. Posts are not intended to diagnose, treat, or provide medical advice. Your Bish Therapist is for entertainment and informational purposes only. The podcast, my opinions, and posts are my own and not associated with past or present employers, any organizations, Bravo TV, Great Heart Productions, or any other television network. The information in YBT podcast and on its social media is provided for general information purposes only and is not intended to diagnose or treat. Please do not act or refrain from acting based on anything you read, see, or hear on YBT, podcast, or associated social media. Communicating with YBT via email and or social media does not form a therapeutic alliance. Melissa, operator of YBT, is unable to provide any therapeutic advice, treatment, or feedback. Whew, that's a mouthful. So as always, thank you so much for listening. I appreciate you all so much. And goodbye for now.